Somebody's okay. It'll come. How you doing, Lamar?
I don't know.
Hi, Carolyn. Hi, Lamar. Hey.
Hi, Lisa. Hi, Carolyn. Okay, it's past time for us to start. Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Everybody on Zoom?
We hear you loud and clear.
All right, let's call this meeting to order. So as we look at our agenda, we need a tech check from any other of our commissioners who are there in person.
Check 1, 2, Mike Fry.
Hi, Mike.
Ann Ash, can you hear me?
I can, Ann. Thank you.
Oh, hi, Lamar.
Hi.
I don't see you.
I'm sorry.
Sometimes we see you on the screen, but I didn't see you.
Well, that will be up to the operator there to make.
I wanted to show you the agenda, but I can.
Oh, I see what
I
you
can
mean.
move our. people.
Rocco, welcome.
Rocco's on Zoom too.
All right, so we have a quorum. We've done our roll check. Rocco, do you want to check your next?
Test.
Yep, we can hear you. I see.
Okay, thanks.
All right, do we have any additions, deletions, or corrections to the agenda? They have the agenda up on the screen, and as well, you may have it.
Just clarify, Lamar, like, so we're doing the Andy Hill at 6:30, Paul at 7:30, and we're not discussing, oh, and then, yeah, I'm unclear. So it's mostly just training stuff.
We have an hour of training. This came up last minute.
Right,
Becky provided this opportunity. Becky has assured me that this hour of training will count as our annual training. We will not have to do any further training this year. And we're all here, present and accounted for. And this will be something that's not general, like a lot of our trainings. It's more focused on planning commission training, as I understand it.
Okay.
I discussed with Andy. And then Paul is going to talk to us about his project with us. Bo, Paul had asked for the link via email. I don't know if he provided it. I provided it, so hopefully he'll be able to get on. And but I don't know what else in number 6 that we'll get to.
Is that me?
Yeah, you might turn your microphone off unless you're speaking.
Yeah, people in Zoom land, please turn your mics off.
Well, I can't because I'm talking, but then I will.
No, not you, Lamar. There's someone joined late and they had their mic open and it echoed.
I think.
Okay.
It was me. I can see.
All right. So do we have any additions, deletions, or corrections to the agenda? Don't forget to unmute if you have something. If not, we need a motion regarding the agenda.
I moved to set the agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mike. All in favor? Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? That passes. We have our minutes from our last meeting. Do we have any corrections on those minutes?
Lamar, this is Rocco. Did the corrections you suggest make it into the final minutes?
As far as I can tell, yes. Bo, do you agree that you put those in?
I sure did.
Okay, I see it. I see it on 3. I can't see 2 right now on the screen.
There's a new change. Was that since this morning?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, let's move down to number 3. The number 3 in the meeting minutes, please, Bo. Okay. I think that it's all there. Anybody else see a correction or anything that they want to change? The only thing that I can think of that I didn't put on here is that we asked Bo to type up 2, 3, 4, all those motions that were passed and provide them to BOT at their next meeting. I don't see that memorialize that in the minutes. But it still, I think, needs to be done. So I don't know if you want to add that somewhere, Bo.
What?
I'd be happy to.
We asked our secretary to write up a memo with number 2, 3, and 4 and provide it to BOT. number 1 as well. We got, let's see here. I'm trying to look, which number is the resolution? Because that one got done. Oh, number 2, okay. One got done. And it got to BOT. But 1, 3, and 4 still need to be sent to BOT in the form of a memo. Bo, is that something you're able to do for us?
Sure thing.
Okay, you might just add, I don't know, under 4 that you'll be creating those in a memo form, run it by everybody in Planning Commission and make sure that it gets in the packet for BOT. Any other additions, corrections? Do we have a motion? Be sure and unmute if you're making a motion.
This is Rocco. I move to approve the minutes with your additions, Lamar.
Okay. Any second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. So let's move in our agenda to public comments. Scrolling up and down, so.
I don't have any public comments here or on Zoom.
Okay, all right. And we're sure there's nobody that wants to comment on Zoom. Okay. All right, let's go to number 5. We've got Andy Hill here and we want her to, we don't want to hold her up. We want her to get started. Andy Hill is from DOLA, unless she sent him. So I assume it's Andy here. And I think we're ready to get going. I'll turn the floor over to her. Oh, right, I'm sorry. Hold it down or just turn it on right now? We cannot hear Andy.
Sorry, I'm just getting the getting set up here.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
just transitioning over to her PowerPoint and then she's going to be driving for a moment. So give me
Gotcha.
one moment to catch up with myself. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
And so right here, I think we set up.
I can see it on my computer. Oh,
Yeah, because I'm gonna go through the slides really fast, so I need to have. Are you down? Great, thank you. Okay. Well, thanks, everybody, for giving up more of your time. I know serving on a board, you end up giving up a lot of your time to support the work of the town business. And I appreciate that you're giving up more time for training and an opportunity to talk and discuss issues between the board and the planning commission. I think that's great. Honestly, wish more local governments would do that more regularly. So it's fantastic. Okay. Normally I go around and do an intro, but I'm going to compress quite a bit of our typical training into a shorter period of time. So we have a little bit of time to discuss some issues that are important to you all. So I'm going to fly through it and let's just have the understanding that you'll raise your hand or interrupt me if you have a question and you want me to stop and slow down and repeat, or I said something confusing, or, this presentation is fairly general. I am not a master of your land use code or comp plan. So if I say something that is not quite right for how Green Mountain Falls does it, and you want to clarify, we can take that time as well. So I'll dive in. My name is Andy Hill, and I've worked at the Department of Local Affairs for coming up on 28 years. And I love this part of the job because I get to go out into communities and really find out how are things working. Oh, I see it's not up there. Is that going to be an issue? Are you guys virtually, are you seeing still the cover slide, or are you seeing what we'll cover today?
What we'll cover today.
Oh, okay. So maybe I can do folks here. Let's try this. There we go. Okay. So my goal here today is just to talk about some of the common issues that we see local officials, both on planning commission and town board, see regularly in their day-to-day work. I won't cover everything. There's so much to learn, as you know, but we'll cover some of the key topics and sort of hot topics. And so these are some of the issues that we'll cover. And, the quick, whoops, I did it again, didn't I? Okay, well, hopefully they're seeing that go through. And so at the Department of Local Affairs, I work in a specific division called the Division of Local Government, and our role is to support municipalities, counties, and special districts with their work. So that's what this training, that's the context for this training. We do these all over the state, both virtually and in person. And I actually prefer to do them in person. I feel like I can hear and see better. So, but let me know, folks virtually, if you're having any trouble hearing or seeing anything, but I will proceed.
Andy, we're still on the slide, what we'll cover today.
Okay. Oh, it looked like it. Thank you. Okay, so can everybody see about DOLA at home?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, you guys. Sorry for the technical difficulties. All right, so in my specific team, I manage a small team called the Community Development Office, and we provide land use planning, technical assistance to municipalities and counties, and connect a bunch of dots between all your planning issues and your other goals that relate, including economic development and revitalization and water conservation and so on. We also run the Colorado Main Street program, which is a very successful program in Colorado with a lot of resources. So it's a fun job. I'm very lucky. We have a lot of resources on our webpage and really geared toward local officials mostly. So you'll find all kinds of stuff on here. If you're interested, spend a little time. We've got some real easy to consume and digest fact sheets. And then for those of you that love data and love looking at your data and trying to anticipate what does that data mean as far as what's going to happen to Green Mountain Falls 2 years from now, 10 years from now, the State Demography Office has some really cool functions where you can do demographic profiles and so on, if you haven't already seen that. Okay, so that was the quick and hopefully painless commercial. Let's dive into your authority to plan as a planning commission and as a local government in general. Colorado is what you call a local control state. We don't have a lot of mandates of local governments. There is no state planning office that comes and tells you and second guesses your land use decisions. You have enabling authority given to you in the statutes to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community. And so that's not only your authority, but frankly, your responsibility, to think about how are we doing that? How are we meeting that objective for current residents and future residents? So most of us are focused on today and just me and maybe tomorrow. But, local governments really have to focus on what's the outcome of this decision 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and so on. So it's a very special responsibility to municipalities and counties. And when you use that enabling authority given to you in the statutes to do planning, and you adopt regulations like you just did in your new land use code, the key thing to remember to make sure that you're staying on the straight and narrow and you're being really thoughtful about fairness and consistency. All your regulations have to be tied to a valid public purpose, and you have to give people who are impacted by those regulations a genuine and meaningful opportunity to participate in the discussion and formation of those regulations. And if you're doing these two things, you're clean, you're clear. When you're not sure, I encourage you to have a conversation. Are we going too far on this? Is this a concern? Because this is careful and incremental work, the work of local government. So I'll move on to the next piece. This slide really just summarizes for you not all of the planning related requirements for local governments, but the key requirements in the statutes for you all to do planning, land use planning. One requirement is that you have what the statutes call a master plan. Most of us now are calling it a comprehensive plan because I think it hit us that to do a plan for the community for the future, it really does need to be comprehensive in scope. Things don't live in neat little silos. The counties have to have subdivision regulations. Frankly, most municipalities do too. Cities and towns also have to have what's called a 3-mile plan. I'll cover that in a moment. And if you address water in your comprehensive plan, there are requirements about how you do that. I'm happy to go into that more at the end if there's time. I put in this slide on comprehensive plans. I know you guys have already done it, but I understand you're going to be re-examining the comp plan and just giving it a quick look and refresh. I think that's great. A comprehensive plan is only as good as it is current and relevant and actionable, frankly. So that's what I encourage you to look at your comp plan through the lens of, is this clear? Does this represent what the community wants? And is it actionable? How will we know if we did it? Do you have an action plan in your comprehensive plan? Are you checking in every year to see how it's going? Are you getting things done? Is it clear who's supposed to be doing each item and by when? Those are things I think really help communities achieve what's in the comprehensive plan, which is really just a vision document. And then as far as how often you have to update it, I encourage communities to look at it every year, specifically the Planning Commission, look at it every year and see if it still feels relevant, if something major has changed, if there's some new data that shows we should probably look at some policy again. We'll talk about that more in a moment, but if you can look at it every year or two, I think that's helpful because you can make minor and small amendments over time to keep it current rather than waiting for it to be totally off base and useless and then have to go out and hire another consultant and do the whole revamp. So most communities, just to give you an idea, update their comprehensive plans once every 5 or 10 years, or as often as needed if things are changing fast. So in communities that are growing fast, they tend to update it even more. And why does it matter? Your comprehensive plan is your intent, right? Your vision for the community is implemented through your regulations, your standards, your incentives, your policies. And so the comprehensive plan should really represent your intent, what you want for the future. So you should use it as a guide every time you get requests for rezoning, or you need to update your code, or you get an annexation request, or so on. It can be really helpful to keep you from living in that very reactive mode, right? The 3-mile plan is just a requirement because there were some folks years ago, decades ago, that were concerned that some cities were going just too far, annexing just a crazy amount of land too fast. And it was freaking people out in the counties. And so they said, all right, You can't annex out more than 3 miles from your current city limit or your town limit in any given year. And here's the important part. It's not just a limit. It also says, the statute says, and not just the limit, you have to also have a plan for if you do annex a mile that way or a half a mile that way or whatever, that you have a plan for how you're going to provide services to those folks. Because if you haven't figured that out, you're making, decisions without good information. So it helps guide you in your decisions for annexation. It also serves as a communication device to people that live outside of town or developers that want to know, does it make sense to annex?
Could I ask you, Andy?
Yes.
You have to have a plan when you annex it. The-
Yes, thank
the-
you. You gave
Is
me a
that what you
great
said?
segue. You gave me a great segue. So the thing about the 3 mile plan is in the statute, it says you have to update this 3 mile plan every year. And I will tell you that most municipalities don't. So what they do is they update it before they annex at a minimum. But you can see how that's a problem because that's reactive. And the whole point is to be proactive. But at a minimum, you have to update it before you annex. Otherwise, someone could challenge your annexation decision. Does that answer? Okay. All right. I'm going to hit on roles very, very quickly because I know you guys are very familiar. But just as a reminder for the context, the role of the elected officials is really to make policy and legislate, to use that enabling authority in the statutes that we talked about, and to really focus on all the issues of the town, right? Everything from, just everything. And then good boards will make sure that they are giving regular direction to each of the appointed boards. Because really when a municipality works best is when the elected board annually revisits their goals and then conveys those goals to the appointed boards. Then everybody is on the same bus, working in the same direction. So that's what we like to see. And I put two-way communication in there because the additional step that really makes the magic happen is when you have regular meetings with your appointed boards to get feedback and input. What's working? What's not working? Where do we need to make improvements? And let's go into an example about that. So planning commissions, your role is you're appointed, you are advisory to the elected board. It's your job to prepare the comprehensive plan and to apply current regulations, even though you will get pressure sometimes to change the standards from applicants or folks that show up to meetings. And you can't, you have to apply your current policy and regulations and maybe make notes. There's the bottom bullet is my favorite because I think the Planning Commission is well poised when focusing on just planning to take notes. When you approve something that just didn't feel like you should have approved that, or a standard that seemed like a good idea when we were talking about it theoretically, now applied to this particular parcel just doesn't make sense. I think it's really good to take notes and talk and think and talk to staff and see if you can't wrestle with a recommendation to the elected board. Should we change this policy or this regulation or this standard? I think that's a real gift, a lasting gift that the Planning Commission can give to the elected board, just sort of that check-in. I'm going to skip this just to move on to, in the interest of time. In fact, I think I invite you to go and look at some of these scenarios later. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to all the scenarios, but you can look at them later, or if you want, if we have time at the end, we can go over any of them that caught your eye. And I put a second slide in there with the answer just in case you, but I imagine most of you already know all these. Okay, so let's get into running meetings because frankly, this and the legal stuff is what I get the most questions on when I do these. And before we dive into it, there's a really important context that you have to always be thinking about when you're evaluating how you act in certain situations. And that context is every time you make decisions, you're acting in either a legislative capacity or a quasi-judicial capacity. And when you're acting in a legislative capacity, you're talking about general things that apply to the whole town, policies and programs and what kind of What should we be thinking about when considering short-term rentals or the comprehensive plan or a land use code? Those are general and apply to everyone more broadly. But when you're wearing your quasi judicial hat, you feel like a judge, quasi judicial, right? You feel like a judge because what you're doing is you're taking an applicant, a person's application or their situation, and you're applying your town's standards to make a decision about whether or not you're going to approve or deny their project or their application. And why it matters is when you're wearing that quasi judicial hat, you have to really up your game to make sure that you're protecting due process and fairness, both for the applicant and for everyone else involved, the neighbors, the opponents, the proponents, and so on. So that's an important sort of background context. Let's say when you're in general public meetings, so your meetings for your comprehensive plan update, that's a legislative action. So you can talk to anyone at any time, get input. Really, the Planning Commission especially should be the ambassador for planning matters and really think about who's not showing up to meetings that we need to show up to meetings, who needs to give us input on these matters. How do we get them to participate? How do we get their input? And then also really listen to the people that do show up and help them feel heard. I think that's such a big part of our job and hard to do sometimes when we're moving quickly. I think another important piece on this is help make it relevant. A lot of folks might come to one public hearing their whole lives. And so if you can start each meeting with a little context setting so that they get a little bit grounded in why am I here and why is this important? Why do you want me to come to this meeting? What am I supposed to say? When am I allowed to talk? Most folks don't know. So the more you can provide information and comfort to them about what their role is and when it's appropriate to take feedback and why what you're talking about even matters, make it very relatable. I think the kind of input that you'll get will be much more helpful. Okay, in public hearings, when you're wearing your quasi judicial hat, there are a lot more restrictive rules. And those rules are really to protect the applicant and all the other stakeholders. So some of the tips that we recommend are that you announce the rules in advance. So I'm sure you already do this in your meetings, right? You kind of announce the rules. So people know I have to sign in to provide testimony or whatever. Another important one is to remain unbiased while hearing all the evidence. And that seems like a given, but sometimes I think we can come in reading our packets and kind of having an idea of how we know we're going to vote. So you really have to constantly challenge yourself to make sure, am I really listening carefully and am I hearing everyone and remaining unbiased until I get all the evidence. And so the key piece on this slide also is every question that you ask of an applicant or anyone else really should be designed to help you answer one question in a public hearing, which is, does this application meet our standards? Not is it good, not is it bad, not will it make somebody upset. The question is, does it meet our standards? So every question that you ask has to help you answer that question. And if you want to ask a question that feels outside of that, I encourage you to just run it by staff. I'm not sure if this is related to the standards, but I'm just curious, and then give staff that chance to kind of help you think through. Because I know serving on a board in the past for me, there were times you just get caught up in the conversation, and it's nice to soundboard, and you can do that with staff quite easily.
Yeah, Andy, could you ask that during a meeting if you're?
Yeah, you can ask staff. I mean, unless you guys have different procedures, we encourage you to ask staff when you're not sure. Because
Say,
they
what
can
do you
give that
think?
advice. And not only does it help you and someone else who also has the
Helps
same
everybody.
question, anybody else that's in the room, it kind of clues them into how this all works. Because honestly, most people think I'm an applicant for the first time, or I'm coming to a meeting for the first time. Most folks like me, new folks in this theoretical scenario that come to your meetings think you're going to make the decision based on whether or not you like this guy or not, or whether or not you have a friend in the neighborhood group that's opposing it, or whatever.
Right.
And so it's helpful to ask questions and remind folks how we make decisions as
So
boards.
everybody knows there's a rule that's in
Yep.
charge and not personalities.
That's right. It
Mhm.
really comes down to your land use code and your adopted policies.
Okay.
That's what makes the decisions at the end of the day. I leave this slide in even though I'm rushing because I get these questions every time. These are the common hurdles because frankly, we're all humans, right? So the common hurdles are, we're not always prepared. I mean, we do our best to review all the packet and think about it and take notes and write down your questions. You're not always as prepared as you would like. The biggest thing I see, not asking enough questions, just kind of going along because frankly, this is a very embarrassing scenario, right? Like, I don't want to ask a dumb question in front of somebody else. I might lose my credibility, or I'm afraid to ask this question because it's going to upset the applicant. Ask your questions. It's the most important piece so that you feel confident that you're making a decision that you're not going to regret 2 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. And that there's some others on here that I think are obvious, but the other big one that we see is deal making. A lot of times, local officials will try to help improve a project and come up with solutions. But if those solutions aren't already required in your standards, you're going off the rails a little bit, and you could set up that decision to be challenged in the future. We can talk more about that if you like. I don't know how often you run into that. And so, you know, I think the goal is to get people to your meetings, get public input as much as you can. And in public hearings, make sure everyone feels heard, follow your own process. Don't deviate from your adopted processes, follow your own land use code and standards. And then the other things that you do to make sure that your decisions are defensible and not challenged. You know these things, right? You notice, you give people an opportunity to be heard, you provide clear rules, you follow those rules, you create a record of decision with findings of fact. So it's very clear to you and any future judge, if you do get challenged, how and why you made the decision that you did based on your own processes and standards. That will keep you in the clear. Unbiased and timely decisions are really important. We do see sometimes boards that get uncomfortable for a variety of reasons and continue meetings in the hopes that the next meeting, maybe some of those folks that are angry won't show up. Try really hard not to do that. Lean on staff to help guide you. And then, of course, complete records also help make sure that your decisions are defensible. Motions. Who's the motion maker? Who's like the excellent motion maker that everybody relies on? Because I know every board has this person. Nobody's telling on anyone else.
Actually, we have a lot of good motion makers.
Oh, that's fantastic. Usually it's like one person that like is very good about taking notes and just knows how to put it together. I'm glad to hear that you guys all share. So probably you don't need me to cover this slide, but I will just say motions take effort. We have a cheat sheet on our website. If those of you that are new and uncomfortable, you can rely on that a little bit. And so I mentioned findings of fact and decision-making. Every time you make a decision in a public hearing on an application, you need to make sure that you have a record of decision or like legal footprints so that if I come to your town and I propose something and you deny me and I challenge you, the judge isn't going to come to town and interview you all and say, why did you make that decision? Why did you vote that way? Staff, why did you write that? They're not going to do that. They're going to look at what they call the record of decision. Did you notice it? Did you follow your rules? Did you ask questions designed to answer the question, does this meet our standards? And so these are your findings, right? And this slide kind of covers that, and we can talk more about it if you have questions, but I think generally if you have a staff report, that really helps keep you on the straight way to make sure that you're going through each sort of hurdle that you have to go through throughout the meeting to make sure your decisions are defensible. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Thanks for pointing that out. sometimes, especially on bigger projects, you might have a work session with staff first, beforehand to, go over some of the nuances or questions or things like that. We see this more often in really big municipalities where they're having quite massive projects. Do you guys do this? Sometimes? Okay. So you can raise some of those issues that you want to make sure get put in the record of your public hearing, but really staff will tend to do that for you in the staff report.
Because I was just going to say that so lately, anyway, since I've been doing this, we might have a work session before the real session, and we're not making law then, but we're discussing it, and the public can come.
Okay.
But we don't make any decisions. But then in the public meeting, we could refer to what was just discussed. Is that what you're saying? Or
Yeah, you
not?
could. You just want to bring it out onto the record during the actual.
During the
public
actual
hearing
public meeting.
piece.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll lean on staff to kind of guide you there, because every town runs their meetings just a tiny bit different, so. I'm gonna skip the decision-making scenarios, but I encourage you to go back and look at them later as a group and go through them. I actually have a long list of them, and I think they're pretty instructive. One thing I have found is, not everyone's on the same page on how to answer those, because they're nuanced and complicated. So I encourage you to look and go through them, or even come up with your own actual scenarios, things that have happened in the past that you're like, why did we have to do it that way? And talk about it.
Andy, where will we find those scenarios? Is that on your website?
I'm going to email you the full list. There's a few in this
Okay.
PowerPoint that Becky has. But I'll send you the full one, so you've got the laundry list of them.
Are we going to get a hard copy of this presentation?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't bring a hard copy.
But we can print it off, right?
Thanks, Bo.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Is it on your website or something?
This one is not, no, because we tailor each one for each community,
Oh,
so.
Because I'm like you, I would love to have.
I was going to get it first.
Yeah,
Oh,
so he'll
yes.
send it out.
Good.
Okay, I'm gonna blast through some of the legal stuff real quick, but this is a reminder that when we're talking through some of these legal and ethical issues, that it's important to remember which hat you're wearing in the moment. You're wearing your legislative hat or your quasi judicial hat. It matters in this context. So when we talk about ex parte contacts, this does not matter when you're working with your legislative hat on, when you're talking about the comprehensive plan or the land use code in general. You're wearing your legislative hat, you can talk to anyone anytime.
Can you talk to each other? What about that if two or more are together or
Yes,
something?
thank you for that. Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned that. You definitely don't want to break the open meetings laws, but you can go and encourage folks to come to meetings and things like that. But I'll focus on ex parte first, and then we might come back to open meetings. Ex parte matters when you're in your quasi judicial role. When you're in that context and you're wearing that hat, someone has come with an application and they want you to make a decision. You're applying your standards to their application to make a decision. So you feel kind of like a judge. Okay. Ex parte contacts are any communication, email, someone stops you at the grocery store, someone sits next to you at the bar, starts giving you an earful, and they say, or they call you or whatever, and they say, look, I can't come to that public hearing next week. Because I'm watching The Bachelor. I can't miss that show. And so I need you to know XYZ. That developer's horrible. I love this project. This is the best thing for town. This is the worst thing for town. Frankly, you want to stop them right out the gate. You don't want them to start telling you anything. Because what's happening is you're getting information outside of the publicly noticed public hearing. And you're not supposed to consider anything in your decisions except what's in your packet and what you hear in the hearing. And I know it sounds a bit crazy. It doesn't seem to make common sense because you think you should be able to talk to everybody and get the whole scoop from everyone. But the problem then is you can't control the fairness issue, that due process piece. And the fairness issue really restricts you to make sure that everybody, the whole board, not just one board member or two board members, the whole planning commission or the whole board and this, you know, the staff and the proponents and the applicant and the opponents, everyone gets to hear all the same information at the same time. So it's very clear how you made your decision. If I see, if I see you talking to the applicant the day before the hearing, and you guys are having a chummy little conversation, and I don't like the project, I might assume that you're having an ex parte conversation, and that I'm going to challenge the decision now if it goes the way I don't want, because I'm going to assume that Kat already has her mind made up before she ever went to that public hearing. Right? So sometimes perception is just as important as reality in government. That's just how it is. People don't like to trust government. So ex parte contacts are, they come up all the time. We just had San Miguel County had something overturned because of some emails, some text messages. And truthfully, that was more about bias, but this stuff comes up all the time. So you really have to be careful not to have these conversations outside of the public hearing.
Well, you should be oh, sorry, but
Go ahead.
well, I was going to say you really should be careful. Because I remember we were told if that happens, say, come to the meeting and tell everybody what you're telling, what you want to tell me. But it's pretty hard to enforce if people just kind of take a walk together or something. If it's not written down, how are you ever going to prove it?
It is hard. It is hard. And I've got a couple slides that will help with that.
Okay.
Do you want to ask a question first?
Could I ask you
in-
another
in,
question
uh,
about this? Oh, go ahead.
In my previous life, we actually had starting points from when ex parte we could have no
That's
ex
the
parte
key.
communications.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if we have a starting point kind of within the local municipality. Would it be when the agenda is published? Or would it be when the agenda,
So that,
that's-
thank you, Mayor. That question is really for your attorney. So I'm not an attorney, and more importantly, I'm not your attorney, right? And so you really need to check in with your attorney to see what they feel comfortable with. But I will tell you that most attorneys that I know, they advise as soon as a complete application is submitted, you cannot talk about it. And what I've seen some cities do lately is they'll send an email out to the boards and say, all right, we've got a complete application. Planning Commission's going to see it on this date. Board's going to see it on this date. Here's the name of it. Don't talk about it until you get to the public hearing. I think that's just a real easy
That's a good idea.
way, so everybody knows and feels confident. And to your question, if somebody does stop you, or you're talking about not that, and all of a sudden now they want to talk about the public hearing tomorrow, you just have to stop them. And if they don't want you to stop them, you tell them, look, you're trying to influence my vote, but the more you talk to me, the more you risk, I can't vote.
Ah.
And we actually encourage
good
that you
answer.
not only come to the meeting and disclose it, that you actually give staff a heads up so they're ready for it and they can advise you. Because sometimes people don't tell you that much. You can disclose it and still vote. Sometimes too many people saw you talking, you had a long conversation, you really can't vote.
Well, that's a good answer. It doesn't hurt their feelings. It's just a rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This seems pretty hard to comply with in a small town where everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody talks to you, you come in and disclose that and say, I've talked to X, Y, Z, and here's their position. Does that give you off the hook?
I would say
No.
you ask that person, you tell that person, you've just made my vote vulnerable. So what I need you to do, this is me, you guys jump in if you feel differently. What I need you to do is email the town staff with your position and make it clear. And then that can be made part of the record,
Mhm.
and can be shared with everybody. So everybody else gets to
correspondence.
see it. You're not relying on you to try to remember or express exactly what they said. And then you talk to staff ahead of time and decide, can I just show up at this meeting and say, look, he got kind of far in before I could really stop him, and this is what I heard, but to really get his position, hey, it's in the staff report. It's made part of the record.
And you're saying two members can't talk about it together?
No, because that's also an ex parte. The thing behind this is, and this, I saw quite a bit of this when I first started in this job. There were people in the local government sometimes, and Rock, I'm sorry, I'll get to you next. there were people in the local governments sometimes that were having, phone conversations to sort of map out, what's your vote? What's your vote? Are we good? And get it all kind of plowed out first, right? Like
Before.
really know, so everyone felt comfortable and confident. That is totally against the point of transparent government. And so that's when we started getting these open records laws and things like that. It's because a few people are abuse that we now have to live within these sort of strict rules. But, truthfully, I think the more we wrestle with things in front of the public, the more we gain their trust, because then they see, well, they really don't have this all figured out. They haven't talked about it. They haven't already made a decision in the back room before the meeting. And I think that's great. There was a question from Rock, I think.
Yeah, hi, Andy. I hope you can hear me. With regard to the ex parte, is that only with regard to quasi judicial decisions and not legislative decisions?
Rock, thank you. Yes, that's exactly right. And that's a really important thing to remember. Okay, I'm going to blaze through because I want to make sure you guys have time to talk through some issues. Conflicts of interest. I'll tell you the short scoop on conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest in the purest sense are when you stand to gain or lose money in your immediate household. Sometimes people will accuse you of having a conflict because you go to that church, live on that street, hate that applicant, love that applicant. That's not a conflict. Those are all bias. Your job is to make an impartial decision based on the evidence that you hear in the hearing and nothing else. And that's impartiality. That's fairness. So a lot of times, sometimes there are conflicts. You're going to work on that project. You're getting paid by that person, whatever, or you're going to financially benefit. But a lot of times the harder thing is, do I have a real bias or is there just a perception that I have a bias? And if you have any questions, talk it through with staff so that they're ready to back you up if someone challenges you in the hearing. If you do actually have a conflict, tell staff ahead of time so they are prepared and ready. Sometimes what you think is a conflict may actually not be a conflict. It would be good to know, right? But if you do, disclose, don't vote, leave the room, make sure somebody remembers to go get you when they're done talking, so you're not sitting outside too long. But yeah, that's the procedure there. And this one talks about bias. Okay, I'm sorry I'm skipping these, but I want to make sure we have time. We can go back to them if we do have time. All right, the Governmental Immunity Act. I just want to touch on this very quickly. If we didn't have this Governmental Immunity Act, no one would ever serve on a board, right? Because I don't know if any of you have been around long enough to have been threatened with a lawsuit. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. Somebody gets angry and in the heat of the moment, they say, I'm going to sue the town and I'm going to sue you because you voted no. The governmental immunity protects you from that. People can't go after you personally unless, and there is an unless, okay? Unless you prejudge. I've had a planning commissioner come up to me one time and said, we start all of our meetings on mountain time, 15 minutes late. And so, I'll talk with my colleagues before the meeting. And I know I've said, someone told me this, I know I've said, gosh, did you read there's no way we can vote yes on this. This is, they're just talking. And if the applicant or someone else overhears, they can challenge the town's decision because you prejudged the matter. So you are not impartial. You're not being fair. The ex parte contacts that we talked about, that's another way to lose your immunity. And this does come up, I don't know, every couple of years or so, we see a lawsuit.
Does the ex parte contacts apply to an advisory board as well as a decision-making board?
It does. It does not apply to staff, but it applies to elected and advisory boards.
I have a quick question. If
Yeah.
an individual loses their immunity, can that impact the town?
If an individual loses their immunity, does that impact the town?
So if one board member, acts outside of, one of these parameters.
Well, I think what happens is you'll have to talk to your attorney about sort of what kind of insurance you have or how all that works. I don't even know. But if I am on your board and I have an ex parte contact and someone challenges the decision because of it, they're likely to win the challenge. So the decision gets reversed and you have to start over. Which the main thing is just time and money, and now loss of confidence and trust in government. That last one's the hardest one to get back. I don't know if that answered. You might have to. talk.
Let me ask one more question about this ex parte.
Sure.
Okay, we can't talk to citizens and we can't talk to each other on the committee. Can we talk to staff about it?
Yes, you can. Thank you
All
for
right.
raising that. Yeah, I'm going too fast, and that's a good thing to mention. And remember, it's only your quasi judicial capacity, right? So if there's a public hearing scheduled, the application's in, you can't talk about that one thing. You can say, I really want to hear what you have to say. I hope you come to the meeting. If you can't come to the meeting, please give your feedback to staff. That way you are hearing from them. You're just hearing at the same time everyone else is. So I know it's a sticky one. A lot of people feel like they can't do it. But I encourage you to try your best, because the legal ramifications are pretty tough. Okay, I wanted to queue up a couple things that I know you guys want to talk about, and really this is your conversation to have, but you can't work for the state for 28 years and not have opinions. So, and then these aren't legal opinions, but I will share my thoughts and opinions with you and then let you guys discuss how you want to move forward. We do a local government land use survey every 5 years, and we ask all kinds of questions, just everything. And we found that half of respondents, half of municipalities in the municipal land use survey use contract planners. So I share that so that you don't feel like, if you're considering this, that you're alone in the universe. This is actually the state of practice, especially for smaller towns. The bigger towns use them less. The smaller towns use them more. And that makes sense, right? Because a contract planner is really just, hopefully, if you don't have enough work or money to hire a full-time planner, a contract planner is usually a more efficient option to get some a lot of experience to come in for that shorter amount of time or workload. So just to give you that number, I looked that up so that you had that in your back pocket. And, if you're considering a contract planner and using one, I'll tell you honestly, since I started this job and before, we've been encouraging local governments to use contract planners, at least for the complex and nuanced stuff. But we encourage for everything, because ultimately your fees should cover most of the costs. Now there's a whole conversation to be had about fees and the unintended consequences of raising fees too high. But all your fees, in order for the town to stay fiscally healthy, financially healthy, your fees should represent, to the best degree possible, your actual costs. Otherwise, you're basically agreeing that all taxpayers will subsidize all of these different services that you're offering. That's what you're weighing all the time, right? So how it generally works, and every town is different and their agreement with contract planners is different. How it generally works is contract planners will charge an hourly fee for the developers, for the big applications, and they'll charge flat fees for the small things. And then they'll charge a town rate, which is lower. So when you need them to do something that's smaller or give the town government advice that's not related to a project, they'll charge usually a much smaller rate. And so for the small items like a fence or a lot line, they would have a flat fee. And then if their time is spent going way over on the fence or the lot line, if they outspend that flat fee, then they would charge the town, typically the town hourly rate, the lower hourly rate, to finish off the work. I'm just letting you know that's generally what I've seen. I think there are consultants that you can negotiate with, especially sole proprietors, I think tend to be fairly more flexible. But so that's the gist there. And I guess what we recommend is when you're thinking about, weighing whether or not to have a contract planner, I talked to a contract planner that we hired and his advice was, remember that every decision you make, the consequences will last about 100 years. And so if you think about it that way, right? I mean, generally, at least 100 years for the big stuff and about 100 years, maybe less for fences. That puts the real weight of each decision that you make in proper perspective. Did somebody try to? Do I need to stop? Yeah, I thought I heard something too, but I don't see anything. Yeah.
I'm trying to do as well.
Okay, thank you. And then as far as planning commission members serving as planning staff, I think it's a really smart question to sort of weigh and consider, where does it make sense to do this and where might it not? And rather than weigh in on that, I just will put out a few things that I think you've probably frankly already thought about. But vulnerabilities that you'd want to mitigate if you take on this approach. One would be risking any quorum. I don't know if you have trouble getting quorum now. A lot of small towns do, but if you don't, maybe this isn't an issue for you. I think another thing to think about is if you do take this approach as using a planning commission member as a planning reviewer or staff, I would encourage you, and if your attorney agrees especially, to really lay out that process and how it would work and set up all the guardrails and put it in your code so that it's communicated. Remember we talked about due process, give people a meaningful opportunity to engage and participate. You've kind of checked a box. I don't know if you've checked all the boxes, but you've checked a box to make that decision a little bit more defensible and more clearly communicated to people that are applying to the town with applications. So for clarity and for potential challenges, come up with the process and then the guardrails. Guardrails could be things like, all right, if Andy comes in with an application and X planning commissioner is my neighbor, that person can't review my application, right? That's an obvious one. You can brainstorm and think of other guardrails that you might want. I think there's also a vulnerability with the perception of bias of an appointed unpaid local official with decision-making authority. We can talk more about that if you want, but I think that's something you guys can talk through. I'll also say what makes me nervous about it is it removes that staff buffer. We really feel like best local government decisions are made with all the checks and balances. And the best checks and balances are staff of some kind, contractor or permanent, planning commission and elected board. That iterative, tedious sometimes process provides lots of checks and balances and helps you catch things that you might not catch. And it removes a little bit of the emotion for the communities that have the shorter processes. Sometimes they can get pushed or cornered into decisions that they're less comfortable with. And staff, I think staff here can tell you, staff tend to get bullied sometimes. And I would hate for my planning commission to be put in that position. And then finally, I would just say, be thoughtful about precedent. We're always thinking about legal precedent. Any decision you make today, you need to feel really comfortable with, because somebody's sometimes going to come back and say, well, you did it for him. How come you're not going to do it for me? And so be thinking about that precedent. Again, this is not legal advice, but I think I took us right up till the line. I'm so sorry, but if you guys want to talk about this now or later, I'll leave it to you. That's all I had to cue those up, and just thank you for taking the time and for the questions and for being here.
Andy, thank you so much. I think this was really helpful. We have Paul here ready to go on time.
Okay.
Do we have any? It looks like Rocco's got a question. Rocco has his hand up.
All right.
Yeah, hi, Andy. I appreciate all the information and the refresher. I do have a concern about code enforcement. So the town just spent tens of thousands of dollars on the new land use code. Our commission and the trustees spent all kinds of hours on this. I know you're not an attorney, but in your experience, what kind of liability does a municipality have or incur by having legislation like our land use code on the books, but not having any enforcement in place?
Thank you. That's a great question. And yeah, you're right. I'm not your attorney, so that's really what matters the most. But I will say, I'm trying, there aren't that many communities out there that have the enforcement thing nailed down. A lot of communities, frankly, rely on complaints for enforcement, which is unfortunate, but that's how a lot of times it works. I think as long as a town doesn't ignore what is easily seen or brought to their attention, I think that's the bigger issue for consistency with enforcement. Because frankly, most towns are going to struggle, even ones with lots of staff, to catch and enforce everything. So I don't know if that helps, but that's a legitimate question. Thank you for posing that.
Thank you.
Andy, is there a methodology that citizens, I mean, should this be in our code? How do they bring this to our attention? Do they go to planning commission? Do they go to staff? How can they best bring it to the town's attention?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That's a great question. Generally, I think how it usually happens is they go to staff, and frankly, that's what you want. You don't want your boards getting sucked into that. But I think what mostly happens anyway is they call staff at the town hall and say, did you know that this guy's building a garage and it's obstructing my view or whatever, or they're doing something that's causing water runoff to come onto my property and damage it. That's what we tend to see. I'm happy to put you in touch with a few veteran planners that have been around the block a few dozen times and get some sample language, if you like, on enforcement. But generally speaking, it's complaint basis and they call staff.
So when staff has been notified, what kind of obligation do they have to do next? Can they ignore it? Do they have to bring it to BOT attention? Do they have to bring it to planning commission? What would be the next step?
Sorry, thank you. It really depends on what you've put in your code, what you've committed to for enforcement in your code. And I don't know if you guys have addressed that in your code or if that's something that you're working on sort of as a next step. But that's a whole big thing, right? That a lot of towns, I mean, really, frankly, all communities struggle with.
The old code, the clerk had to be the enforcer. Because Chris Frandina would walk around, somebody complain and she'd go and say, you don't have a permit for that.
Yeah.
They kept her pretty busy.
Yeah.
Andy, any language you can provide or person that you can put us in touch with to help us with that, we'd really appreciate.
Sure thing.
Any other questions? Andy, thank you so much. I feel like this has been very valuable. And we really appreciate your time and how quickly you moved through this and really chose the most important items to talk about. Thank you. I think we're ready for Paul. He comes next on our agenda. So Paul, whenever you're ready and want to unmute. And Bo, I don't know if you can share Paul's documents or if he has control of them or how you plan to do that with him.
Well, thank you, Lamar, for inviting me to talk to the Planning Commission, and thank you, Bo, for displaying the documents. I can see them, I think others can as well.
Thanks.
So yeah, so just by introduction, I think I know most everybody here, but just in case, Paul Yingling, I live at 11120 Pueblo Avenue.
Could you talk louder, Paul? I'm sorry, I'm kind of hard of hearing.
Yes, I certainly can. So is that a little better?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. He just
Okay.
moved the speaker. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Ann. And as I mentioned, Paul Yingling, 11120 Pueblo Avenue. I was asked to perhaps provide some tools on strategic planning to help committees provide input to the Board of Trustees that would ultimately translate into a revision and update of the capital improvement program and the town strategic plan. Just a little bit of background. This is my day job. I work as a consultant and facilitator for strategic planning and risk management in public sector organizations. This particular product that you're seeing on the screen grew out of a consulting job that I did for the Department of Interior. There is a office in the Bureau of Reclamation that manages water and power, in this case in the North Platte, and they had a terrific strategic plan, and nobody was actually doing it. And so this office brought me in and said, look, we think we've got a pretty good product. We just need to get greater buy-in, get people to actually believe in it. And the remedy was to create a bottom-up process where the people who are actually living the plan get input into the components of the plan. So if I could direct your attention to the screen, the image you're seeing here is a proposal to take about an hour and a half of your time at some point in the future and facilitate providing that input. So I'll talk for about 10 minutes tonight, and I'll explain to you what that process is and then field your questions. The big objectives of this are, first, to celebrate the successes, identify the things we're doing right, to identify improvement areas, especially for fiscal year 24, and then to develop strategic planning skills among members of the town's various committees. The first element you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, and that is review best practices and celebrate successes. And I think this is important to start with the positive. The town staff, our residents, our neighbors, the committees, the planning commission particularly, are doing stuff right. And so let's identify and celebrate the stuff that's going well, especially so that the Board of Trustees can make resourcing and priority decisions based on the things that are going well. The next and more in-depth processes are to identify focus areas for improvement. So I'll ask Bo, if you would, to scroll down to that Excel spreadsheet. Thank you. And as you can see here, this is an example of the town CIP. And in the Excel version of this document that I've provided to Lamar and the other committee chairs, there is a request to rank order what you consider, what each individual member, for example, of the Planning Commission, considers to be the top 5 priorities. Pardon me. So, for example, you might feel that, let's just take one that's not yet been done, that replace the altitude sign at Hotel Street at a cost of $3,000. That's your number 1 priority. And so you, as a Planning Commission member, vote that as number 1. And you go through all the not yet completed projects, and you get up to 5 votes, with your number 1 vote being weighted the most important. But if you could continue to scroll down to those that blank sheet that has unidentified projects. You also have an opportunity to recommend projects that don't exist. So you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, there are recommended additions where you can say, well, there's not yet a drainage project for Iona, but doggone, there sure should be, because that's a mess, just to take one example. And I think that's really important. So that's my number 1 vote. Or I don't think we should do anything to resurface the ground cover of the gazebo. So I recommend deleting that project, and that's my number 3 priority. The key is that in this process, each individual member of each committee gets a say about up to 5 votes on the CIP of things that are currently on the CIP that should be elevated and prioritized, or things that are not yet on the CIP that should be added, or those that should be deleted to make room for others. And this would be a process where each individual planning commission member, each individual member of the fire mitigation committee would have that vote. Next is input to the strategic plan. And so I'll just direct your attention to the right-hand side there. And this is a chance for members of the various committees to revise, to assess, recommend, and refine the current strategic plan. So I'll just give you an example that's near and dear to my heart. As a member of the Fire Mitigation Committee, I'm involved in developing monthly fire mitigation tips. You'll notice that objective 2.1 is develop a public education brochure, Living with Wildfire. Well, we haven't exactly accomplished that, but we're taking a different approach. Rather than one big brochure, we're using repetitive monthly communications, a different one each month to address a different topic. So around the holidays, we were focused on holiday and Christmas tree fires. When the summer comes, we'll talk about clearing brush and the importance of chipper days. But the key is that this is my chance as a member of the Fire Mitigation Committee to say, well, this part of the strategic plan needs a little bit of tweaking because we're doing it a little bit differently. So here's the language I recommend. And I could write in refinement, develop wildfire public education monthly tips rather than a brochure. So that's my chance to weigh in on what I think is different. And then after you've had a chance to weigh in on both the CIP and the strategic plan, Bo, if you could, I'll ask you to go back to those top pages, the page that has that quadrant of urgent and important. Yes, thank you. On the left-hand side there. This tool that has the urgent and important is another chance for both you as an individual committee member and then ultimately your committee chair to say, okay, of all the things that we want to do, to me the most important thing is changing our fire mitigation public education process. To me, that is urgent, meaning time sensitive, and important, and has a significant consequence for the town. Or I might say, well, replacing that sign on Hotel Street is important, it's something we should do, but it's not urgent. Then in the lower left quadrant, the urgent but not important is something that might be super time sensitive, like if you don't take care of it now, there's going to be a flooding issue at the pool if we don't repair pipes and pumps. That might be something we've got to do just because it's time sensitive. And then that last quadrant, neither urgent nor important, is something that we just ought to stop doing. It doesn't impact the town in an important way. It has no time sensitivity. It might have been something we've always done, but we could stop doing it and there wouldn't be any impact. It may have once been important, but now it no longer is. So those are the big inputs to the strategic plan. And the process would be individual committee chairs meet with their committees, aggregate that input, then the committee chairs meet, and the planning commission would facilitate an aggregation of those inputs that would ultimately go to the board as a consolidated recommendation. Of course, the board has discretion about what they want to do, but when they make those important budgetary and strategic planning priority choices for calendar year 24, they've heard from the most active members of our community, those involved on the committees who've had a chance to weigh in on their most important projects. The last part of this process is an opportunity to develop some strategic planning skills. So on the lower left-hand side, you'll see 3-column strategic planning process, design thinking, and leading change. These are seminars that I lead periodically on these topics. And so if you were to ask, hey, Paul, tell me more about empathizing with end users and what does that mean for fire mitigation? And we might talk through, well, let's empathize and visualize what fire mitigation means to an elderly person with limited mobility who's in a high fire risk area and doesn't have a car. Someone else normally does the driving. And that might be, okay, let's focus on that one person and figure out what fire mitigation, education, support services they need to be safe and well-informed in our community. Whatever the task is, if you tell me, hey, column 3, number 6, what does it mean to create short-term wins? I can bring up some materials and talk about that concept for strategic planning. Now, we can't do every step of all 3 because that would take about 2.5 weeks, probably time that you don't have. But if you want to pick a topic that you're especially interested in, we can delve into it in this 1.5 hour or so long facilitated dialogue that I'm proposing to Lamar and the other committee chairs. So that's my story. Lamar, Rocco, others have really been helpful in developing this concept. I've seen it work elsewhere and think it might be useful, but I'd like to stop talking now and answer your questions or address your concerns.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, Paul, thank you so much for being willing to help us with this. We're so fortunate in our community to have professionals like you who are willing to volunteer and be helpful with all of these things. What questions do commissioners have about the process? I guess just to start it off, I'll ask, so when the Planning Commission comes together to try to create something as you've described to give you, is it best that each member kind of go off on their own and think about what's important to them and why, and then we come together? Are you in that meeting where we all come together and try to flesh out what's going to be most important? And then do we just present 5 that are aggregated from everybody on the commission, or will you be there to help us, or is this something we present to you and later you work through a topic that we chose?
Right. Well, Lamar, certainly as the committee chair, it's your discretion. I would recommend having that I come to facilitate that dialogue. Everybody goes off individually and creates their own version of what they think is important. And that way you avoid groupthink because everybody reaches their own conclusions individually. But then there's when you all come together, I would propose that be facilitated, and I'd offer to facilitate that. That way you can focus on the substance at hand, and I'm just there to listen, aggregate, and ask clarifying questions. In terms of the final product, again, as commission chair, you have a lot of discretion. You can say, hey, I want to capture everybody's inputs, so I want priorities 1 through 20 on my document. Or you might say, no, we've only got 5 votes. Let's limit it to 5 and come up with a consensus. The key is that you as the committee chair will be carrying this forward with your peers in fire mitigation and parks, recreation, and trails. And so your commission will be creating the document that you will then be carrying forward to that dialogue with your fellow committee chairs. I'd also propose to facilitate that dialogue, but that too is, of course, your discretion and that of your colleagues.
Thank you, Paul, that I really appreciate that you're willing to sort of help walk us through this process. And I know that you've got a timeline. Do you want to share that with us so we kind of know when things are due and that sort of thing? And Rocco's got his hand up. Rocco.
Yeah, Paul, thanks for the rundown. One thing I was thinking about when you were talking about the project, when you have the different committees look at the capital improvement program, should we just be looking from the Planning Commission at the Planning Commission related items, or are we looking at the entire CIP?
Yeah, and again, I would certainly say it's your discretion. From my view, I would encourage you not to take a stovepiped approach. So, for example, you might know things about, fire mitigation that you feel are an important priority, even if it's not narrowly in the Planning Commission focus. There might be cross-cutting issues, like for example, cellular service or emergency notification or road improvements that have economic impacts and fire mitigation impacts and recreational impacts. And so they're not narrowly limited to one domain. So my advice, and it would be advice because obviously you have discretion on how you apply it, but would be to look holistically at what you feel is most important. It may be that you're most informed about planning commission issues, and that's where your attention goes. But I wouldn't want to limit anyone going in to say, only consider planning commission related issues.
Great question. That's helpful.
Lamar, I do have a timeline. I think that this Zoom link has sharing disabled. So Bo, if you can enable sharing, I can share a timeline, or if not, I can just talk through it. That's fine too.
Bo, I think that was in his original documents that were included in the BOT pack. I don't know if you have access to that very easily.
You can share now, Paul.
Thank you, Bo.
Okay. All right. So this is my proposed timeline, and that is we're already well into this. We've presented the template to the Board of Trustees. They approved it. That's why I'm able to talk to you this evening. And the committee chairs have received these templates. I would propose that by the end of April, that each individual committee schedules that hour-and-a-half workshop where they come together and have a facilitated dialogue where they're providing that input. And not later than the end of May, we then bring the committee chairs together and they represent their committees in creating an aggregated document so that by the end of June, the Planning Commission can then carry a consolidated input to the town staff. At this point, I think it's probably wise for me to back out because this is now not a work process. It is a finished product that is the consolidated judgment of the committee chairs. So it's not right that I represented. I think it's better that the Planning Commission chair or the collectively the chairs of all the committees present it because it is their finished product and their recommendation.
Paul, we're not seeing your timeline if you are trying to share your screen, and I'm not seeing it.
Oh, I'm awfully sorry. It shows that I'm screen sharing. Let me try that again. All right. How about now?
Still don't see it, but now, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not sure why that happened, but I'm glad you told me. So yes, that's the timeline you see on the screen is the one I'd propose, and that way, every step of the input process, there's a facilitated dialogue that I can help with, but when it comes time for that end product that the committee chairs have all settled on, I think that goes forward to the Board of Trustees from either the Planning Commission chair directly or the consolidated input of the chairs collectively.
Okay, so we're already mid-March, and so we've only got for all three committees to meet with you and get this finished by April 30th. We don't have a lot of time. So we probably need to pick a date. Our next meeting dates, regularly scheduled meeting date, is the 11th of April. I suppose we could combine it if you're available for the 11th of April.
Let me see. I'm opening up my calendar as we speak. So let's check the 11th of April. Yes, I am in town and available.
Okay. Well, we might think about, this is a workshop obviously, and it's an hour and a half. So we might think about really using, it has to be a noticed meeting, obviously, but trying to get that knocked out, starting at 6:30 on the 11th. This would mean that everybody on the planning commission would need to come on the 11th with their homework done. As Paul has described, with you picking out your top 5, you don't have to limit it at all to planning commission items. It can be anything on the CIP. So we got training tonight with Andy. Will we actually be making modifications as the planning commission based on all of this work that we're going to do together? Will we be making modifications in the comp plan, or how does this ultimately work?
Yes, and my understanding is that any changes to the CIP or comp plan would need to be board approved. That would be part of both the board process this summer and the budgetary process feeding into calendar year 24. And so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It'd be recommendations.
Right. I think that the binding changes would come only as a result of board action.
Gotcha.
I have a question. Could I ask a question? This is Ann.
Oh, of course, Ann, yes.
I just wondered, we're talking about the comprehensive plan. On October 18th last year, they had an all-day meeting of the trustees with a lot of recommendations and so forth that aren't always in the comp plan. Can we refer to that as well? I've got all that information.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that would be terrific.
It's not limited to just looking at what's printed that we looked at tonight.
No, obviously, other work you've done, your own experience. I strongly encourage you to bring all that to our meeting if we settle on the 11th. That input would be very helpful. The only thing I would say is that as you consider that, with only an hour and a half.
Right, but I mean, for your 5 suggestions, you can consult that as well. I would limit it myself to 5 things, but
Right.
Just as an idea. Another thing I didn't understand, Paul, are the other 2 committees going to meet with us, or are you meeting with them separately?
I will meet with each committee separately.
Okay.
And then with the committee chairs collectively towards the end of May.
Just the chairman of the committees? Is that what you?
Yes, and I think one of the reasons for that is if we get all of you in the same room talking about town business, we're now in a requirement, and Bo can correct me, you know the requirements far better than I, that has to be a public notified meeting. A discussion among the committee chairs, I don't think meets that threshold.
So
I believe that's true.
who do we give our 5 suggestions to then? To you?
You give it to all of us. We're going to discuss it together on
On the 11th?
on the 11th.
Oh,
That's your homework as you bring your.
and that can go out in advance, can it? So that we don't just come without knowing what everybody's suggestions are?
I could be the central point for that. If everyone
Oh.
wants to send things my way, I can compile that and then distribute it.
Oh,
Who's
that'd be
that
helpful.
talking? Who's that talking? Is that Paul or is that Bo?
That was me, Bo.
Paul, what do you prefer? You're the one that's running this process. Do you prefer everybody come fresh, or do you want them to know ahead of time?
No, I really think that it's better that each individual person, as you say, does their homework, but they bring that to the meeting. There's no need to send it to others in advance. In fact, I would argue it's better that you don't, because that way you're not influencing anyone else's judgment about what they think. Every person arrives at their conclusions individually. that's the input, each individual person's recommendations. The output is a consolidated planning commission recommendation on the 5 most important capital improvements, any recommendations for refinements to the strategic plan, and then a recommendation on that urgent and important, what's most important to tackle first. So yes, I'd recommend do your homework, but don't turn it in. Just hold on to it for the basis of a discussion on the 11th.
Paul, to clarify, you want 5 things on capital improvement and 5 things on the strategic plan? Or just,
Yes, no, on capital improvement only, 5 votes on modifications, additions, deletions to the CIP. For the strategic plan, in fact, let me stop sharing and I'll ask Bo to go back to the strategic plan. For the strategic plan, as many refinements as you feel are necessary. So if there are things that we're no longer doing, or language that doesn't make sense anymore, and Bo, if you could just scroll down a bit till we get to that strategic plan. So the CIP are those 5 votes. When we get to the strategic plan, as many refinements as you'd like to make, I would encourage you to make those. And to kind of build on Rocco's earlier point, here I think you should really focus on planning commission related issues. So you might not want to talk very much about, fire mitigation issues if the fire mitigation committee is tackling that, but looking at those different strategies and goals for the strategic plan, there I'd recommend that you limit your focus to planning commission issues, but you're not limited to 5 inputs. As many inputs as you'd like to make, you absolutely can.
thank you, Paul. I'm glad we clarified that. So all the commissioners, we do have everybody here tonight. Is there anyone who cannot attend something as we've described on the 11th of April at 6:30? And is there anyone that doesn't understand what's required? We have 5 votes on capital improvements. It can be on any topic. And we have as many refinements as we want on the plan, but we are to focus on planning commission issues.
Oh, you will.
Any questions?
Oh, Becky said she'd help me. I don't know how much I'm supposed to write down and stuff, but with the little thing there, should we fill in on those forms? Would that be helpful?
And you can handle it however you'd like. This is your homework. You do it the way you want to do it, and you bring it for an aggregate
Okay.
on the 11th.
Okay.
But just to go over it one more time, capital improvement, 5 votes only, and it can be on any topic. Strategic plan, as many refinements, modifications as you want to suggest, but stick to planning commission topics. Okay? And if anybody needs me to put that in writing, I certainly can.
I would appreciate an email going out to everyone if you don't mind, Lamar. Thank you.
Will do, Bo. All right. Any other questions, comments, anything else for Paul this evening? Paul, again, I just can't tell you how much we appreciate having professional leadership and guidance with this.
Oh, well, thank you, Lamar. I appreciate the chance to help. And thanks to all of you, my neighbors. When you see me walking the dogs, please honk and wave.
Thank you, Paul, for taking your time tonight. And we will you.
All right. Well, thank you, Lamar. If there's nothing else, then I'll bow out of the meeting, if that's okay.
That's perfect. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
You want my microphone? Todd?
Now we're going to number 6. We're lucky tonight that we don't have an application that I know about. But we're going into construction season. And we better get things figured out about how we plan to manage planning. Since that's our responsibility. I believe we have a flow chart that Mayor Todd has created. And I know this is a draft only, but it's just for discussion purposes only. Todd, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
If we have questions, we can ask them. All right, so he has the applicant submitting an application, and they've paid their fees. And the form includes a planning commission member review question that says, are you okay with having a planning commissioner review this? So if yes, it is submitted to the planning commission member who chooses to take it on. If no, the package goes to the contract planner. Now, Todd, was your thought process that if they choose yes, or rather if they choose no, the fees would be higher to cover the contract planner's cost?
Yeah, I don't think we can really do that to try to maintain, just general, and the microphones here are kind of messing up on us. So if we cut in and out, I personally don't think we can do that, because I think we tend to maybe force someone into a situation that they may not want to be in, especially if you start looking at bias potential and whatnot. And it's usually it's the person who's making the application. If they don't think they can get a fair shake, then we need to have a path for them. But I don't think we can charge any more for it, because otherwise I'd be trying to force them into something they don't want to do.
I'd love to run that by the attorney, because I heard in our training tonight, she was suggesting that we pass on fees. And if it's more fees, it's more fees, right? But, if they choose to go the free route, I think they should have a benefit from it financially. And if they don't feel comfortable, they should pay for comfort. But I don't know if we can run that by an attorney. Anyway, just a question. So if they feel comfortable with the planning commission member doing it, then the planning commission, just to follow the flow chart, the planning commission member conducts a preliminary meeting with the applicant. Now, what I don't see is, I think at the beginning, the minor site plan, this should originally be submitted to staff, I would assume, right? I don't see that in the flow chart.
Yeah, I assume that up in the applicant block that it would be submitted to staff.
Yeah. So we probably need to have that square. And then staff will be the one asking these questions and then sending it in the correct direction. So then the PC member reviews the packet. Does it comply with our land use code or doesn't it? And we have different ways to go, yes or no. The PC member prepares the packet for approval. Then Todd has the flow chart going to staff. Do they agree, yes or no? Therefore, the staff approves or denies and notifies the applicant. There, the staff has final approval authority and can overrule the PC member who did the work on it. And this is for minor site plans only, okay? If they don't feel with having the PC member do the initial review, because it isn't the final decision, then it goes to the contract planner. And I guess, if we run out of money, we run out of money. But anyway, it goes to the contract planner. Contract planner conducts the preliminary meeting, reviews. Does it comply with our land use code? Yes or no? And prepare the packet material. Then it goes. So staff is also overruling or agreeing with the contract planner. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. Because on the minors, the staff makes the final decision per our code.
Okay, all right. All right. So that's that. I don't see a flow chart for larger decisions, but I assume they primarily will just go to the contract plan.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was assuming along those lines. I wanted to try to come up with, I just wanted to try to see if I could draft something for at least going through the minors.
Yeah, I think, that's helpful. So do we have comments, questions from Planning Commission regarding this?
Yeah, I have a question. Used to be that we thought staff would do some of the minor things. You're not in the loop here. Is that because you don't have time, or?
They
do
are.
we
They're making
really
the
want the
final-
planning commission members to do this? Seemed to me.
Mike, they are in the loop. They're making the final decision on all of these.
I know, but we, at one point in time on the minor issues, we were going to have staff do it, and this is a different approach.
The review, you mean?
No, I meant somebody comes in for a fence permit or a deck permit or a outbuilding permit, something like that. We were going to have that just done by staff, and because it was a minor issue.
Does staff want to do it, Becky?
Mike, I think what you're referring to was because we had a staff person that was serving in the planning capacity that Nate was doing.
Yeah.
And Nate had formerly been the town planner as well as the town clerk. And so he brought that skill set along with him.
Okay,
We're
so
in a-
that was a Nate thing.
Yeah, and we're in a little bit of a different situation now, just
Okay.
with, yeah.
That answers my question. Thanks.
Rocco has a question.
Yeah, so I wanted to thank the mayor for putting together this. I'm not an engineer, but I can kind of follow the process. I think it would be good to have one of these for each of the types of applications, but this is a good start. And just to reiterate, if a planning commission member is involved with the package, then they would not vote on the issue when it comes before the entire commission. So might want to just make that explicit in this diagram so that people understand that commissioner would recuse themselves, bringing that layer of transparency to the process.
Yeah, I originally thought that might even be a separate chart in and of itself, but yeah, this is easy to change.
Yeah, and I think everything needs to start with staff. When they submit their applications, it needs to start with staff. So with those two changes, I think this looks really good. Other comments, questions from commissioners?
I have a question, Lamar.
Yes, Ann.
If a planning commissioner is going to get involved, what if it's somebody like me that doesn't feel I could help the person? Would there be somebody on the commission that has more expertise, such as Rocco, that would usually do that?
And it would be a commissioner's choice to become involved. Nobody's going to force you to do it.
Well,
Only be if someone feels they have the expertise and feels comfortable with it.
because the code is complicated. That's
Any
all I
other
had to
questions?
say.
Any other questions? Todd, would you mind making those changes? And if you want to do one for each one of the potential applications, And this could be provided to citizens so they understand the process and put on our website.
Yeah, I'll add the two mods on this one. That's pretty easy. Coming up with the others, it's probably with the meetings and the trips to Denver coming up, it's probably going to take me at least 2 to 3 weeks to get the rest.
Okay, hopefully we don't have any applications before that. So again, with time of the essence going into construction season, Becky, where are we on the selection process for a contract planner that looks to be very key in our process?
So we can move ahead at any point in time. We can get a contract put together and in front of the Board of Trustees at their next meeting. I think really what we wanted to do what we wanted to accomplish at this meeting was to kind of achieve consensus that this is the way that we wanted to go so that the rest of that process goes smoothly.
So which contract planner are you thinking of focusing on? Are we kind of doing both like we talked about, or what's the concept?
I would love to engage Julia for some of that stuff that she might have availability for, knowing that her plate gets fuller and fuller all the time, always having the option for her to be able to decline work if it's not going to be completed in a timely fashion or dependent upon her workload, and then utilizing McCool as the next option for anything that's more complicated than Julia wants to take on, or if it's she's prohibited by time. That would be my preference.
Yeah, I
Who's the
really
second
like
person? Who is the second person?
McCool, the company that also the meeting along with Julia. I liked what Andy said today about using sole practitioners. I wonder if there's any other sole practitioners that would be available and more affordable than potentially McCool.
We could certainly research it, and we can also proceed with McCool and try it out for a period of time, a year, and see if it meets our needs.
What's
Yeah.
the difference in the fee between Julia and McCool?
It would have to be negotiated.
We don't know yet what the fee is. Okay,
Julia has not provided a fee.
okay.
I will say that Andy provided me a range of fees. And I'm looking for my notes on it. I believe she told, yeah, here it is. She said sole practitioners are typically $75 an hour up to $200 an hour. And, you know, that you can just negotiate with them. I like having somebody in the area where you're not paying travel expenses. And then she said, typically there's that town fee that's even less than the negotiated fee. Which brings us to the next page in our documents so that we can see the fees that we are currently charging. Because over and over, it's been suggested that we pass on these fees to our citizens. And so I think mostly what we're looking at here is
You've had to pay some fees, haven't you?
is the bottom half of this first page, the planning and land use administrative costs. So, and then onto the top of the next page where you've got, like if you want to do a deck, that's $125 fee. If you want a variance for a subdivision, that's a $500 fee. Variance for zoning is a $500 fee. So y'all see them there. I'm just going to ask Planning Commission, do you think it's reasonable to charge any more than we're already charging to our citizens?
I think we probably have to.
Nobody says we have to. I'm asking.
I mean, just to get it done right, that to, you
Well,
know.
here's my concern. if we charge too much, we're gonna have people, we have no enforcement, as was brought up this evening. So what's to keep people from saying, forget that, I'm not gonna put in an application? Yeah.
That's always happened, though. I remember it, people sneak around and do it anyway.
But if you make it prohibitively expensive, and it's gonna happen even more. And then we might as well just shut down the planning commission, because why would we bother to be here? You know?
Well, that's just my opinion. That's all.
I'd have a different opinion. I'd like to keep them as low as we can. And still be able to pay the bills, but I remember a neighbor of mine said he had to get a fee just to replace the boards on his deck. He's not changing the shape, the size or anything. But he had to get a fee to put new boards on his deck.
And that's why people
And you
cheat.
have to pay $200 to go put a new floor in your deck. I think that's unreasonable. So I think we ought to keep them. This is a small town and we don't have a lot of real wealthy people around here, I don't think.
No,
So I'd like to
I
keep
agree
them
with that
reasonable.
Too. I do philosophically. I do.
I
Yeah.
agree, Mike, and practically as well, because if you put them too high, nobody's gonna pay them. And again, we might as well just shut the whole thing down. Lisa, Rocco, comments?
I just wanted to ask, did we get a sense of McCool's charges? We sort of skipped over that. That sort of went by. I was trying to figure out how to put my hand up. I couldn't. And then I think I think, we have zoning, we have these applications. It's supposed to be a legal event. And then we have the charges. And in a way, we're biasing ourselves, let's keep it really low so people actually do it. I don't know. It's really about enforcement too. So anyway, I agree. I mean, I don't want to charge a whole lot, but just to think about those parts that kind of fit together.
I agree, Lisa. I wish we had enforcement. We don't. Rocco, comments?
So I think, the enforcement piece would probably be a good conversation for the future. When we see what the bandwidth is for the town. We are paying 1.5 people in the Marshall Department. I don't know what their appetite is. There was some discussion when they were hired about enforcement. It kind of went away. And so I think it's time to revisit that. There was also a comment that I heard before. If someone comes in and builds $1 million house, they're paying the same fees as somebody, who's doing a minor remodel. That's not exactly true, because regional building does collect a percentage of the tax on the materials that comes back to the town. So if there's a big project outside of this fee structure, the town is actually seeing some tax income come in based on the cost of materials for the certain projects. So that's another potential source of revenue. I do agree. Keeping the fees low is a good approach, so people will actually follow our process. I did understand what Andy was saying from DOLA, that applicants should pay their share. So I think we need to find a compromise, and I think the current fee structure is a starting point.
If we could do something about enforcement, I wouldn't have a problem with raising the fees a little bit. As a compromise. To answer your question, I'm looking back at my notes. Carrie said her hourly rate's 120 an hour, mileage is 60 cents a mile, and that she'd do that lower cost town fee at 115 an hour. So those are my notes. And then we also talked about, or Andy tonight talked about, some flat fees. And so I have no idea what those flat fees look like.
Lamar, I believe that those flat fees, excuse me, are in relation to certain things like on the fee and fine schedule, you'll see that we've got a flat fee for building a deck. But the other fees that you'll see is on there where we've got an additional fee that would be the flat fee or an hourly fee, plus the cost of the attorney or engineering that the town would incur. So it's set up similarly to how it is now. It's just that we would charge a flat fee for a lot of those minor, simple projects. The larger ones would be either hourly, or a pass-through agreement as it
No,
is now.
I get that. It was my understanding from Andy, and I believe from Carrie as well, that some of these contract planners will charge a flat fee for certain small things like a deck or a fence. And I don't know what Carrie would charge on a flat fee, and I do not know what Julia would charge either.
We can explore that.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, again, Mike keeps asking, and I keep asking, if we can figure out what it has been or will be negotiated, it'll be easier for us to say, you know, what we can do regarding fees. But I heard from the majority of the commissioners tonight that they do not want to raise fees significantly. So when will this negotiation with these contract planners be completed, and when will we learn about it?
The trustees do that, don't they?
I believe staff is working on it.
But you decide.
Becky?
I would really was just hoping to get consensus from you all tonight on a process, a recommendation that you all are comfortable with. I think that with the recommendations that you all have made on Mayor Dixon's flow chart, I have enough to begin tackling this, and I'll start working on it. I'll try to get the town the best negotiated rate. I do have one request of you all. When we were looking at how to revise this fee schedule, we did notice that the fees, the items that are listed on the town's current fee schedule aren't in particular alignment with the new land use code. So Mayor Dixon did take a stab at renaming the items that are on the fee schedule to be more reflective of that land use code. And part of this came about because we engaged in a little bit of an exercise of comparing all of the communities around us land use, their fees for their land use applications. And what we found is that there's no uniformity whatsoever. Everybody's calling the same thing something different in another community. So it made it really hard to do a comparison. So therefore, we did take a opportunity to begin to rename these items in more alignment with your land use code. I would like to share that all with you and see if there is, if you agree with it, if they need to be named something different as a starting point on the revision of this fee and fine schedule. And then also ensuring that there's nothing that has been omitted that could come up, that we're just making sure that it's comprehensive. So I think that ends up being something that can get us certainly one step closer.
Okay, so the information that we're looking at in our packet, has it already been somewhat revised or not?
This is the current fee schedule that was adopted for 2023 by the board. They do have the opportunity to amend that and adopt a new fee schedule. So I will email that out to you.
My question is, does this match what it's called in our land use? You said that the mayor had tried to go through and kind of revise. So is that what we're looking at, or is
Nope.
it still?
No, I'll send that out to you, Lamar.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and I'll add the dollar amounts are pure wags.
Okay. That would be helpful. Thank you. I think all that's really missing is the zoning map. I know that Nate had talked about doing that for us to get that where it matches our current land use, with our zones that we created. Where are we? Is that something he's still open to doing for us, Becky? Do you know? Where are we on that?
I can circle back around with Nate and see if that's something that he can do real easily. I was able to look into that file where he was working on it. It is in a shape file. And I don't know that I have the expertise. I'd have to open it in AutoCAD, and I've never done that. So if we have
Yeah,
anybody,
it's in AutoCAD files. And we don't have AutoCAD. There was someone else who was in here doing something, and that's how they put them in, was in AutoCAD files, and they never converted them.
Oh,
and I don't know who made that last zoning map.
It
when-
was Nate, wasn't it?
no.
It might have been done as part of your last comprehensive planning process is what I'm guessing. And so maybe reach out to the consultant that did that plan and see if they can,
Do the history on it.
yeah, get the history or update it cheap or free.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's exactly who did it. The name temporarily escapes me, but when we had the new comp plan, they redid the zoning map, so they should still have the electrons on that.
Some of that was changed when the foundation got a zoning change just not too long ago, but
So that's been updated, Ann?
No, we'll have to add in the annexation.
Okay,
annexation and all that, yeah, that was a complication.
okay. Well, we have a lot of changes that need to be done, and we need to get it on the website, and we need to get it. So Becky, you're gonna get back to us about that.
I've got a list of to-dos.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I think we have our agenda. Is there anything missing from anyone?
Lamar, did you think that we were going to recommend either Julia or McCool tonight?
Well, Becky, just in our discussion with Becky, do we need to have something formalized, a motion or anything? I think Becky's going to be working to, she said she had enough direction from us with the flow chart and what the comments we've made, the changes on it. Becky, is there anything else you needed from us on that?
Thank you guys so much. I think I'm good. If I need some other feedback, I'll circle back around.
Okay, all right. And if you could maybe just sort of get back with us on the negotiations or just sort of where things landed, because it's sure hard to make a recommendation regarding enforcement and or fees going up if we don't even know what we're paying. So,
When you make a recommendation, when Becky makes a recommendation, does she just make it to you and Lisa or to all of us? I don't get this. I don't understand how that can work.
I'll provide an update to Lamar and she can share it with the group.
And she shares to the rest of us, and that's legal.
Mhm.
You can do that. Okay.
yes, as long as you don't start a conversation about it, it's just information only.
Just so that we're kind of on the same ideas. Okay.
Information only. No answers back. Okay.
Okay.
Hey, Lamar, this is Todd. Hey, I got something that I want to bring up the planning commission real quick. We're probably going to be going out for RFP for the engineering for a lot of our RTA items. And it may include some additional, we may include some additional bridges and definitely some of the big culverts downtown. But I just wanted to bring up to your attention.
Okay, timeline on that, Todd?
As soon as we can get it done. I mean, we basically have to put the RFP together and then go out, and once we get some potential cost numbers back, then we'll have to go try to chase down some money to do the engineering and the cost estimates.
Okay, and what will you need from the planning commission?
I was just wanting you guys to be aware that this is going on.
Okay, all right.
You
So-
know, but by the way, I have a question too. There's something in the,
Todd, you'll
I'm
keep
sorry.
updating us with this.
Well, you had two people trying to talk at once.
Sorry.
Todd, you'll keep updating us with this?
Yeah,
And did you have a comment?
I had a question, maybe Becky could answer about in the comprehensive plan. There's been this FEMA buyout of floodplain town areas. Is that current? Are they doing that?
I need to circle back on that and get a little bit more info. I know that there was certainly some FEMA funds used to mitigate some of the flooding issues that occurred in 2018.
Uh-huh. They were
So-
offering to buy properties that are in the floodplain, apparently. At some point. And pay people to give up their property.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
It's
Yeah,
in the plan.
and we just had our audit and that, I don't remember that coming up.
It's in the comprehensive plan. though.
Yeah, but I mean, the audit was like last week.
Well, no, I mean,
Yeah, it may be in the comprehensive plan, but the comprehensive plan may be, the programs that were in place at that point in time may not be in place anymore. But, and
Yeah.
it was not mentioned as we had, when we had our audit, because we had the flood folks come in and audit us last week and.
oh, the flood folks.
I called them flood folks.
Okay, I just was curious about that, if that still existed or, I don't know.
Okay, I've kept everybody late. Let me say thank you to all of you who have attended. I know everybody had family conflicts, health conflicts. It was a sacrifice for many of us to be here tonight. Rocco is with his mother who's very ill, and Rocco, appreciate you taking time with us tonight. Lisa is very busy trying to leave town tomorrow, and I have been sick as I can be. So I appreciate everyone being here and the sacrifices that people make to do this. And I would like to adjourn so that we can get everybody home, unless there's something else. All right, meeting stands adjourned at Thank you, Becky, for arranging Andy, and thank you both for your work tonight.
Thanks, Lamar. Hope everybody's there okay.
Feel
Thank you.
better, everybody.
All right, good night.
Good night.